Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the President Energy Atome Energy investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted any time using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during today's meeting. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be made available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and you'll receive an email when they're ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll, and if you would give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand over to Chairman Peter Levine. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. You'll all be pleased to know that you're not actually going to hear from me after this brief introduction, because this isn't about me or about President. This is actually about Atome Energy PLC, which is shortly to be admitted to trading on AIM. Actually, the expected date is 30 December. So I'm going to be introducing our colleagues in Atome Energy, and it is them who are going to be doing the presentation. What I would say just at the outset is that we've received some questions from President shareholders as to the progress of the placing. I can say to you that there will be an announcement tomorrow relating to that, and obviously we've had to hold it back because of the influence of primary bid, and also because it's an IPO. We are going to be announcing it tomorrow, and we are expecting that the admission document is going to be published. And I'm pleased to tell you that we are in the place that we hope we would be in relation to the placing and the admission, and that will be reflected in what we have to say tomorrow. So we're very cool about this, and we're very pleased that despite the time of year, it is now on course for the start of trading of shares in Atome Energy PLC as an independent company on 30 December 2021. And therefore, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the new executive board of Atome Energy PLC. And the first person I'd like to introduce is Olivier Moussat, the CEO of Atome, and he will introduce his colleagues, Marie-Rose de Valderes and also James Spalding. So over to you, Olivier, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. And I hope you find it rewarding and interesting, because not only are we going to be announcing tomorrow the successful placing and what will be, we hope, a successful admission, but we're also going to be announcing the ratio of shareholders in President in terms of the dividend and specie in Atome. So thank you very much, and over to you, Olivier. Take it from here.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend this presentation. So I am Olivier Moussat, the CEO of Atome Energy, and with my team, which will be introduced just shortly, we are very happy to be here to discuss what will be the first company dedicated to the production of green hydrogen and ammonia listed in London. Our goal is really to invest in the Swiss Army knife of decarbonization. And what we mean by that is we have seen that electrification of energy has gone quite well, but you have an opportunity with hydrogen and ammonia to invest in the commodity of the future. It is really it's a molecule. It is what will help decarbonize a much wider system. We're talking about trucking, we're talking about shipping, possibly flight, agriculture. So we will see a real acceleration of the decarbonization thanks to green hydrogen and ammonia. So I will now go to the next slides, where, as Peter just said, we will list by 30th of December. And we were incubated within President Energy. As you know, most of you here are shareholders of President. The first thesis really came up when President was investing in Paraguay. And what you realize is having a country with large needs of imports of energy in the form of fertilizer, in the form of oil, but at the same time, where you have the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world. With the growth of a hydrogen economy, and now we're getting to the point where it is economical to produce green hydrogen and competitive versus hydrocarbon-based energy, it seemed like a complete natural opportunity to explore this further. However, what we realize is that, from a shareholder-based point of view, from a business point of view, oil and water do not mix. We're talking about very specific ways of doing business. It's also obviously a green business. We are fortunate and thankful that the shareholders of President are coming in to Atome Energy, and we are focused 100% on green ammonia, green hydrogen coming from hydroelectric in Paraguay and geothermal in Iceland. Both the markets are also really well suited because they have an existing offtake in both locally in Iceland and in the regional Mercosur market to take the ammonia and hydrogen we will produce. If we had tried to list, let's say 9 months ago, we would have had to have a discussion on why it is okay to invest now in hydrogen and pay a green premium. But today we have seen, with the commodity price rising really sharply since the middle of the year, it is now cheaper for us to produce on our sites green ammonia and green hydrogen than what we are seeing on the hydrocarbon-based markets. We are thankful to have been able to put together a very focused board with real deep expertise, both in energy and the hydrogen sector, into delivering projects. So our target raise was £9 million. We are glad that we were able to achieve it, and which will allow us to get and to advance both of our projects to final investment decision. So a little bit of background. Most of you know Peter. Obviously, he has been successful in a couple of energy companies and also industrial construction companies. And that's quite important for us. In the game of hydrogen and ammonia, you need to understand the commodity market. You also need to understand that, like any midstream business, it's all about the margins. It's all about it being extremely cost conscious. And that culture will remain within Atome as well. I started as a commissioning engineer in the power sector, actually with a very high focus on water with a GE company. Then I moved to Schlumberger on the oil and gas side, then Standard Chartered Bank, where I ended up co-heading the oil and gas team. And for the past 9 years, I had been with the International Finance Corporation, which is the private investment arm of the World Bank. And there I was in charge of not only the oil and gas assets, but also the wider power asset in hydrogen and in energy storage. So what I saw there, we were obviously, this is a different scale. We're talking about very large projects. What I saw is that the access to funding for good projects was not the issue, but what was really missing are good projects with good teams, which is why, when I was discussing with Peter and he asked me to join, I really jumped on the opportunity. I will now pass on the microphone to James so he can introduce himself.
Thank you, Olivier. It's a pleasure to be here with all of the President Energy investors. I briefly mentioned that I have almost 30 years experience, mostly in the public service. I was Minister of Finance of Paraguay, which is also Governor of Paraguay to the IDB and the World Bank. I was President of the National Oil Company of Paraguay, a state-owned company. Ambassador of Paraguay to the US for 6 years. I was a negotiator for Paraguay in the Mercosur trading bloc with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. But most recently, and I think the focus here is that I was Paraguayan General Director of Itaipu from 2013 to 2018. So for 5 years, I ran the jointly owned dam with my Brazilian colleague. And as Olivier mentioned, Itaipu is the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world, 14,000 megawatts. I'll be getting into more detail further on when we look at the Paraguay slides. But of course, Itaipu and the excess green and renewable energy, what makes the project in Paraguay feasible. Thank you.
And Mary Rose, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Rose de Valadares, and I too have been in the energy sector for about 30 years. Most recently, I was the general manager of the International Energy Agency's Hydrogen Collaboration, And of course, it goes without saying that we're very pleased with the progress that's been made in the hydrogen space. But I was also with the United States National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I've worked as well in the private sector in fuel cells and bioenergy, and served on the boards of the National Hydrogen Association and the New Mexico Solar Energy Industry Association, which is where I started in the energy sector building power systems, renewable power systems.
Thank you very much, Mary-Rose. And we are extremely glad that especially you were able to join us, because you have seen the ups and downs and the promises of hydrogen and why it's different now. And clearly we couldn't find someone better than Jim to join us into helping deliver Paraguay. So what are our advantages? And well, first of all, you have to remember that in the cost of producing hydrogen and ammonia, green hydrogen and ammonia, almost 70% of the cost is related to the price of electricity. And the fact that we have access to existing power supply on a baseload, stable basis, at very competitive prices, allow us to produce hydrogen and ammonia at the cheapest end of the spectrum. The fact that it's baseload allows us to have also a wide choice of technology. We will get into that a bit later, but clearly there are some of the renewable energies which are intermittent in nature, and because of a manufacturing process are less suited than you would get from stable power. Where we are today is we have advanced significantly on a number of memorandum of understandings, cooperation agreements, LOI, with a number of key players, including the National Power Company. We also know where we have land, with access to water, access to transmission, and export facility. And all of that is quite important, because we will not need to build power supply. We will not need to build transmission line. We will not need to build long access to water or transport links, which will reduce any capex we would have had we started from a really greenfield basis. We talked briefly about the end market, and we will go further into the details. And our technology agnostic approach allows us to use the best possible technology at any point of development. And we are taking what we call a phased project development approach. You've heard a lot about very large gigawatt projects announcement. The reality is we know that the cost of electrolyzers will continue to decline as they had so far. And a bit like solar, the thing you do not want to do is to build now the largest solar plant, which in 5 years' time will be very expensive, will be obsolete, and will be a stranded asset. And as the same theory for hydrogen, we want to make sure that we increase our capacity as we increase the demand, and also take advantage of all of the cost reductions which will be coming. Clearly, between COP21 and COP26, we have seen a very much an increase in the support of governments on the hydrogen economy. We are also in places with positive fiscal environment, stable environments as well. And we have access to skilled workforce. I mean, just to give you an example, in Iceland, they have been running electrolyzers for nearly 20 years. So finding people to help you run and build the plants is actually not a problem. We've talked about, obviously, who the board is, but also we have local management in place to deliver the projects in Iceland and Paraguay. The UK office will remain quite light. It's all about ensuring that we have the right structuring, the right access to funding, the right work on the off-takers with the international off-takers. But really on the ground, we need to be there to be able to deliver as fast as we intend to be, because the idea for us is to get to FID by the second half of 2022 and to have first green hydrogen in early 2024. Now let me go to the next slide. So just a little bit of an idea of the progress to date. As we discussed, now we have a board in place. We have an experienced management team in both Paraguay and Iceland. We have now the MOUs with Unde, the national power company, for the supply of up to 250 megawatts of power. There is access to more available power in Paraguay, but we have decided to reasonably size our projects for the moment. And as we deliver faster, we will then have line of sight on the allocation of the next 250 or 500 megawatts of power. We also have a cooperation agreement with Itaipu, the dam itself, through its PTI, the Technological Park of Itaipu, for the provision of land and water close to the generation, which again reduces our costs. In Iceland, we have been discussing with Landsvirkjun, the national power company, for the supply of 30 megawatt in phase 1 of power, and then a further 70 megawatt for a total of 100 megawatt. We also have been discussing quite actively with Halder Topsoe, who helped us into the design, into the early design of the plant, for the supply of electrolyzer, and obviously the ammonia loops as well. And we have also discussed and agreed with the municipality of Husavik for the operations on the Baki industrial site. And that's quite important to identify today sites where you can build fast, where you actually do not have environmental issues, so you can have fast-tracked acceptance on the ENS side, which have type of issues which could delay your projects. And of course, from a government support, we have met with the ministries of energy and the ministries of environment in both countries, so they are aware and supportive of the project. And it's a small token, but the government of Iceland provided us with a $50,000 grant, which allows us actually to expand a little bit our studies, especially on the carbon trading. On the offtake, we're having multiple discussions. Clearly, having Trafigura as one of our foundation shareholder, which is one of the largest trader in the world, and especially in ammonia, is extremely useful. But nonetheless, we are looking all across the board to make sure that we optimize the market for the molecules we will produce. So obviously, what is the opportunity? And well, Goldman Sachs described it as the $10 trillion green opportunity. As it is ammonia and hydrogen, it's a molecule. And what you can do is directly displace oil and gas. So we're looking at, obviously with a 2050 expectation, the market expects that we will be able to address about 20 million barrels a day of displacing oil by hydrogen and ammonia. So obviously it's ambitious, but if we want to reach net zero, this is what needs to happen. We also see that the hydrogen demand will multiply significantly by 2050. And to give you an idea, today, the global production of ammonia is about 70 million tons a year, of which more than 95% is derived from hydrocarbon and hence creates a lot of carbon. That needs to double from 140 by 2030, and it needs to double again. So it's a question of, you see the market coming, you see the demand coming, and yet there hasn't been that much focus on production and especially getting to market fast, which is where we are. We also seen a lot of support for green energy. You would have seen in the EU, they have dedicated a 80 billion euro fund just dedicated to hydrogen. In the UK, about £4 billion just dedicated to green hydrogen. In the US, I think they talked about a $3 subsidy per kilo of hydrogen. So there's a lot of movements going into the right direction. We don't intend at all to run a subsidized business, but clearly, we need to be completely aware of what is going on, how our market is evolving, and leverage all of this government push. As you will have seen as well, is that now the carbon market has grown up leaps and bounds. It is, again, it's an opportunity for us to create more revenue, as for 1 ton of ammonia that we produce, we will generate about 1.7 to 1.8 ton of carbon credit on the scope 1 and 2 basis. So again, it's one of these multiplier effects that we will be able to access by producing green hydrogen and ammonia. If I can now pass on the baton to Mary-Rose.
So as hydrogen production is the foundation of this US $10 trillion opportunity, the electrolyzer is the cornerstone of production. So electrolysis is the process of splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and the electrolyzer is the device that does this. And if you're using green electricity, renewable electricity, you produce no emissions in the process. Today, the following kinds of electrolyzers are commercially available on the markets. In the low temperature category, we have alkaline and polymer electrolyte membrane electrolyzers, also called PEM. And in the high temperature category, we have solid electrolyzer, solid oxide electrolyzer technology. And as the technology is matured and the scale of the market grows, we are expected to come down the cost curve, as Olivier said. Already in the last 5 years, electrolyzers cost has been reduced by 50%. We expect by 2030 that this is going to decrease another 40%, and this is a critical period for our projects. And by 2070, we expect that there will be a 70% reduction. So essentially, we are looking at a situation where ultimately we will be reducing the cost of hydrogen production below $2 and possibly below $1 as well. So next slide. So what does this mean then? Hydrogen, of course, is the you make ammonia from hydrogen. And so this is where we are today, and ammonia is not just a product in its own right, but it's also, it is an energy carrier, a carrier of hydrogen. So today, most of ammonia is made from fossil fuels because, of course, most of hydrogen is made from fossil fuels today. The 2019 global production of ammonia amounted to about 150 metric tons per year. Now, this amount is expected to grow considerably, but today, 70% of ammonia worldwide is used for fertilizers and agriculture-related uses, which account for 25% of greenhouse gases in the world. So this gives you a sense of where we are going in our value chain in the markets. In the fertilizer market, we are looking at a situation where the growing population is now 7.6 billion, expected to grow to 8.6 billion by 2030 and 9.8 in 2050. This is a real market for fertilizers, and the green fertilizers will really help the world get to net zero. There are other key markets here, including shipping and chemical feedstock and energy storage. So the future of the green ammonia market is really bright. I talked about fertilizer, but shipping is an area where, since 90% of our goods globally are shipped on the open seas, this is really going to be a major opportunity for ammonia. It is the shipping market is controlled by the International Maritime Organization and all of its multiple sectors, where there's ongoing work in vessels of different kinds and the process of using ammonia to power them. So ammonia is a very highly efficient energy vector. It is 3 times the energy density of hydrogen, and it really amounts to an excellent energy carrier. And the production of hydrogen and ammonia through the green route is going to be the very most effective way to go. Unlike the other current production methods, it does not produce emissions, and you do not therefore have to store any emissions. So you can go straight to the green opportunity, and hydrogen production can occur. You can ship hydrogen directly, or you can ship it. As ammonia, and to end uses where it can be utilized directly as ammonia or decracked to create hydrogen again. And the hydrogen safety route is the hydrogen safety record for shipping is excellent. And so just to summarize the opportunity and how it works, you see on this slide on the right a box that talks about the process. Electrolysis is utilized. It splits water into hydrogen and oxygen, and actually you get 8 times as much oxygen as you get hydrogen. And so the oxygen too, we intend to monetize. It's a very valuable commodity, and this has certainly been proven out in the pandemic. And then from the air, you separate and get nitrogen. You put these two into an ammonia synthesis loop, which was called the Haber-Bosch process, and you come out with green hydrogen. So this summarizes the process that will be used to reach the $10 trillion opportunity.
Thank you very much, Maya Rose. And I want to also to say, as we're going to go now describe a project in particular, as you see, the main thing here is electricity. It is the source, obviously, with the water. But the main cost, again, is electricity. And the 2 countries we are working on, because we are talking about excess electricity, you can actually lock in long-term power purchase agreement with fixed electricity prices. So a lot of us in other markets like Europe, like the US, understand the power market as being, let's say, a very spot market, where maybe you can hedge, your gas bill once in a while or your electricity. But the reality is, what we are talking about here in our project are power purchase agreements which are going to be 10 years and beyond, with a fixed price that we know today and that will apply in 10 years' time. And that really makes a very big difference in our competitive advantage, rather than, let's say, locally produced hydrogen in the UK, where you have to compete with the grid every single day. And as you know, normally you could buy about, let's say, you could buy offshore wind power for about, let's say, $40 a megawatt in the North Sea. But today we're talking way more than 200 megawatt hour, as the wind farm didn't produce enough. There was enough wind to make the power run. So it's a little bit different. We're really talking about a process using a fixed source and coming out with a fixed commodity on the other end. I will let now James talk about Paraguay.
Thank you, Olivier. Well, as was mentioned, Paraguay is one of the projects where we will be focused on as Atome Energy. And in this case, I forgot to mention that I'm also president of Atome Paraguay, which was created in September. So we're the only green hydrogen and ammonia project with in-country office and with a staff, which we think is a very important competitive advantage versus others. But in this case, the opportunity is, we see, as was mentioned, the fact that we are joint owners of Itaipu Dam, the second largest in the world. It produces an average of 95 million megawatt hours per year. Because of the drought this year, it should reach about 75 million, but we hope to get back to those numbers from the average before. But in the case of Itaipu, of the 14,000 megawatts, each country has the right to contract half of the capacity. So Paraguay has the right, or the ANDE, the National Power Company, has the right to contract up to about 6,000, a little bit more, megawatts. And of that, right now, because of the size of the country and our GDP and the demand, ANDE is contracting about 30% of our half. So as Olivier mentioned, there's excess supply available that is being bought by Brazil today, but ANDE has priority in contracting what it needs. So that's available today, and I'll get into more detail. Because also the other advantage of Itaipu is, as Olivier mentioned, the competitive and stable price that we can achieve, and it's 24/7, of course. President, as Atome's largest shareholder, is also a very important advantage to have Peter, with all of his contacts and in-country experience, is also key for this project, and we're moving forward quite rapidly. But I wanted to concentrate on two opportunities that we see. First of all, as was mentioned, the fact that Paraguay is a very important importer of fertilizer. Most of you probably know this, but we're the fourth largest exporter of soybean in the world. And the grain sector is very important for Paraguay. So just looking at 2019, the imports of fertilizer was almost $450 million. But we think that because of volume and price, 2021 will surpass that very comfortably. So this opportunity of substituting fertilizer imports for domestic production, and again, this is just looking domestically. Paraguay is a landlocked country bordered by Argentina, Brazil, and Bolivia. And if we just look across the river Paraná to the Brazilian states of Paraná and Mato Grosso do Sul, there are two huge powerhouses of grain production also. So we see a market right across the border eventually for the green ammonia production. And the second point I wanted to mention is, as a landlocked country, Paraguay relies heavily on the waterway, which is the river Paraguay, that basically divides the country north-south into two. The waterway is administered by 5 countries, so Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay all form part of an agreement to exploit the waterway. But Paraguay is the 3rd largest river fleet in the world, behind the US and China. It's equivalent to 5% of our GDP, so it's a $2 billion investment, and they move most of the commerce that goes in and out of Paraguay. So we see an opportunity also, because of Paraguay's commitments to reach net zero by 2050, big opportunities in this sector. And what isn't shipped out by barge is done by land, mostly through Brazil. So again, there's an opportunity there for trucking to also move from diesel to green hydrogen. And I wanted to point out that just talking to one of the most important barge companies in Paraguay, they had mentioned that because they depend on imported fuel, their prices have gone up 35% because of fluctuation internationally. So again, to have a stable supply is a very interesting point of attraction for them to convert. So I wanted to go into the next slide, which I think is, I have to do that, sorry. Yeah, the next slide, well, you can see the project there. The phase 1 is 50 megawatts. Alkaline, as was explained by Mary Rose, the production figures are there. Not only hydrogen or ammonia or a mix, but also the production of oxygen that with COVID, we've seen how key this is. In a lot of cases, Paraguay has to depend on imports of oxygen. That was a very tricky situation at the height of the pandemic. The second phase will be 200 megawatts. The technology is still being looked at, but in total it's 250 megawatts, which is about 1/3 of one turbine of the 10 that Paraguay has of Itaipu. And there you can see the Itaipu Dam on the bottom photo. But as I mentioned, the case of transportation, oxygen, the chemical and industrial uses, also for the meat stocking plants, the frigoríficos. And I wanted to point out here that we've had very good conversations with end takers. And I mentioned Trafigura as a key player. We've met with them locally in Paraguay. We're currently working on an MOU for the trading desk, which is done directly through Geneva. But also Trafigura, as everybody knows, is an owner of a major barge fleet under the name of Impala, and also has a very important network under the name of Puma Energy, and has expressed interest to begin pilot programs for providing to the shipping and to the trucking industry. So we're working on that. And the next slide, I think, gets more into the detail to finalize. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. The agreements, as was mentioned before, we have an agreement with ANDE that was signed on the 4th of November. That's the bottom photo, where ANDE, the national power company, that is completely vertically integrated. So generation, transmission, and distribution is today administered by ANDE. So ANDE is actually the shareholder of Itaipu for Paraguay. So this is very important for us because we have one conversation with one provider, and it's making everything much more efficient. As the top map shows, Paraguay, landlocked country bordered by Argentina, Brazil, and Bolivia. And we can see in the middle photo, where I want to focus the attention, that red rectangle up in the upper left-hand corner. Those are the 48 hectares that we're currently in conversation with the PTI, with the technological and innovation arm of Itaipu. That's on the Paraguayan side of Itaipu. Itaipu Dam, you can just see on the lower right part of that photo. So on the right of this is Brazil, on the left is Paraguay. And that property is located very near the power source, which is of course important because of quality, and also the transmission loss will be zero. So we feel we can get an even better competitive rate because of the proximity to the power source. And the green blue that you can see in most of the photo is the Itaipu Lake, the reservoir that is fed by the Paraná River. The Paraná River is one of the most important rivers in the world. On average flow 15,000 cubic meters per second. So water, of course, is a key component for the production of green hydrogen, and we will have access. So these conversations are moving forward. PTI would be responsible in coordination with ANDE to build the substation, initially 500 megawatts, so double what Atome would be at its final or intermediate phase. And also the conversations with the environmental ministry and others concerning the use of water. I wanted to point out that in Paraguay at the moment, there's no canon or royalty paid for the industrial use of water. So this is another advantage. So we're moving forward. We're very, very optimistic. This week, there are further conversations with PTI, already looking at a draft contract for once Itaipu donates formally this land to PTI, that Atome will have priority access to this area, and that we can begin all the following phases. And as I mentioned before, this area is the eastern part of Paraguay, but 13 kilometers south of where this location is a friendship bridge, which connects Paraguay and Brazil. And just across the river, that's where the state of Paraná is. And there's a second bridge being constructed that we finished in about a year, which will help with the flow of traffic and transportation with our neighbor. So that's what I could give, and be happy to answer any questions or any more details that you might ask in the Q&A. Thank you.
No, thank you, James. And clearly for us, it's a foundation project, right? With 250 megawatts, we really take care of a local demand and a little bit more. And then as essentially we will get asking for allocation for further power, which we'll have priority on because we'll be the first one to deliver hydrogen on the ground. Then we will start looking at export markets, which is, and we've already been approached by a number of international traders looking at export markets, because now you can actually ship economically green ammonia over thousands of nautical miles. In Iceland, it is roughly the same strategy. We're going and we are doing as simple as we can, focusing on just the midstream part of the production in a phased manner to make sure that we don't build too fast and too fast in the cost curve and too fast vis-a-vis the existing demand. So 30 megawatt, most likely using alkaline as well. And on phase 2, SOEC technology. SOEC is very interesting because it is 30% more efficient in converting power into hydrogen. And that's essentially 30% more efficient as far as a higher revenue in the bottom line. But it is still a little bit early in the technical curve, making it a little bit of a risk if you want to go and project finance it. The production facility will be located right next to an export port. But also, we have to remember that one of the largest industry of Iceland is shipping and fishing. And as part of Iceland, like Paraguay, being one of the greenest country in the world, has a very aggressive target of decarbonization. And the first one would actually be the shipping industry. And we are currently talking very actively with a number of them in order to get them to convert their ships to ammonia. To give you a sense of scale, it would only take the 6 largest ships in Iceland to convert to ammonia to offtake all of our phase 1 production. Nonetheless, we are also talking to a wide array of offtakers, including Trafigura, of course, but also with the Green Energy Park of Bremen, the city and the port of Groningen, a couple of gas utilities in Europe, because as you may know, Europe has mandated an increased proportion of hydrogen into its natural gas system. And so how the Icelandic opportunity came about, well, actually, it's a team called Green Fuel, which had been working on the opportunity for about 3 years and going through different iterations of a business plan. And we got involved with them. So you see on the top picture of a gentleman in the middle called Magnus, who is the VP of commercial for Green Fuel, is an ex-colleague of the World Bank, and he approached us. And we figure out a good way to work together and actually apply the Atome strategy into Green Fuel. What you see on the left, at the bottom left, is Siggy, who actually used to work for one of the largest fishing shipping company in Iceland. We're talking a multi-billion-dollar business. So he knows the downstream market extremely well. And on the right, the GM for How the Topso, as they signed the MOU a few months ago. So the next step for us, to reach to FID, is to enter into the definite power purchase agreement with Lensverken. That's in the works. Also finalizing the arrangement for the green industrial park at Baki and the access to water. Again, I go back to water. It is very important. You want to minimize every single cost and ensure that you have access to the best, the easiest access to water, which will of course need to be purified. But if we're looking at other places, like in the Middle East, like in Australia, where access to water will not be natural or actually quite expensive because you will to desalinate, that again continues to help us be more competitive on the global scale. So the timeline that we've talked about, that you probably have seen in the presentation, so we are on target. So admission to AIM, it will happen on the 30th of December. And we will spend the next 3 quarters of 2022 to reach final investment decision, to sign up all of the PPAs, to sign all of the land agreement, to sign all of the EPC contractors, and of course on the project finance as well, so that 2023 will really be focused on the construction phase. We're talking, existing units. There is no technological wizardry in there. There will be, let's say, 10 megawatt skids, added one by one. And which is why it can actually happen quite fast. And again, that's the advantage of reasonably sizing your phase 1. And as we build up, then we will look into phase 2 for 2025. What I need to say is we're really talking about these 2 projects, but actually the advantage of Atome being listed, it offers us a much wider array of opportunities. And we have already been approached by a couple of teams who had been trying to develop some hydrogen projects, but where couldn't quite get there just yet. And also from our point of view, we will integrate vertically, which is we will not only produce the hydrogen and the ammonia, but we will help create the market. And as James discussed earlier, we are talking with the downstream players in Paraguay, in Iceland, in Europe, just to essentially help create the market for our hydrogen. With that, I think we've reached the end of our presentation, and I will now move on to the questions.
That's great. Olivier, James, Mary Rose, thank you very much indeed for updating investors this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review those investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the Q&A, can be accessed via your Investor Meet company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after this presentation's ended, we'll redirect you in order that you can provide the company with your thoughts, views, and expectations. Olivier, if I may hand back to you, obviously investors have had the ability to submit a number of questions through today's event, and thank you to everybody that has taken the time to submit those questions. But perhaps if I could just hand back to you to read out those questions, and where appropriate to give a response, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And I will allocate, as appropriate, but thanks for your question. And some of them, quite pertinent, and some of them clearly, we need to explain a little bit better as well. So there was a question from Shola, asking, are hydrogen projects only viable when there is excess electricity? And if there's not electricity, is it actually economical? Can our business model work? Well, actually, if you look at other companies, Hydrogen de France, which was listed on Euronext in June, and they raised about 100 million euros on a $400 million valuation after reaching FID on a couple of projects. So they had crystallized the value. Their business model is to use hydrogen as energy storage. And what they are doing is they are building both solar plants and a hydrogen electrolyzer unit to use that as essentially storing the energy so that they can use renewable energy essentially at night. It's it is clearly what needs to be done in systems which don't have access to excess electricity, but also it makes the projects more expensive, and it's a different economical way. Our view is, as we are obviously looking at, say, it's a same business model as what you have seen in the mid-cap oil and gas, it's all about location, getting the best location with the best access to the resources. And in here, it's, we are going after, to use an oil and gas vernacular, PUD resources. And it's getting to FID to go and develop these existing reserves and putting them into production so that we don't have to do both. Clearly, when we grow bigger, in the next 5 years in these locations, and let's say in Iceland, there's only so much excess capacity available, you would probably have to go and develop an offshore wind farm. But that creates other capexes. So our idea for us is this is still a relatively nascent economy. And how you make your difference is, again, you have to be very, very cost conscious. And so where can you go today where you can minimize every single cost you can? So you go where you have excess power available, ready to contract on a long-term basis, which is why landlocked countries or island countries with excess energy are the best place for that. And also you look at places where you have an existing market and access where you have water, which is available and, again, easy, so that you can really concentrate and minimize your capex. And there was a question from Dennis Kay, which is, okay, where are we on the cost curve compared to some of the largest competitor? Well, because we are going small, again, there is actually efficiencies about being small, because you have to remember that the largest electrolyzer in operation today is below 20 megawatt. So it is great. We will absolutely need the gigawatt projects. But our view is, scale is not your friend in this particular time if we want to produce hydrogen quickly. And we are seeing the disconnect of the market. There will be much more demand than supply by 27, 28. And this is where we want to be, and then grow from that, because we will have credibility on the ground with our partners and the experience of delivering. I am going to go, because I saw a couple of our questions. So I think from Dennis Kay again, there was a question about our geographical market and how are we in Paraguay and Iceland connecting to delivering to that market. Well, remember, Iceland is part of the European community, economic community. So it's a natural off-taker for any excess that we have. But what we see today is there is actually quite a significant demand in Iceland itself. But then, if we go and export, transforming hydrogen to ammonia, transporting it and exporting, and then changing it back to hydrogen when it gets to Germany, for example, our landed costs would be, let's say, around $6 per kilogram, whilst we think that the demand today, the cost at the pump for hydrogen in Germany is above 11 euros. So even though you have to export, you are more competitive when it's domestically produced, because again, we have been very cost conscious all along the chain. There was a question which was both from Mark B and from Zivko M about how we were going to finance the projects. Well, I think we have to take a little bit of a step back, which is why is FID so important for us? Well, FID is the point where all of the value is crystallized. We have signed the long-term power purchase agreement. We have signed the equipment. We have signed the offtake. So we know what is going to cost us, what is our input price, and who's buying it at what price. And it is firm locked. So all of the NPV that we have currently, heavily discounted, is not, it's essentially completely de-risked. And so what we expect is that we will have three options when we get to FID, where option number one, we can come back to the market at a much higher valuation because we have proven all of our reserves, if you will. Option number two, which is what we have seen a lot of incoming today, where we have green infrastructure funds who are looking for projects like ours. They need to invest in infrastructure projects in green energy. And of course, their returns requirements are quite different because they're looking at, again, 10, 20-year projects already secured with a good line of sight. And that's kind of our natural partner who could then, farm into the projects or take a portion of the equity so that we would continue to operate our projects, but we wouldn't need to raise further equity. And then option number three, clearly, a 10, 20 megawatt project is not exactly interesting for a Total or a Shell. But when you have line of sight on 350 megawatt and more of a hydrogen project in construction, it's a very different discussion. So again, another avenue. But on our financing plan, what we are looking, and we are already discussing with the leaders in the sectors like Natixis, like Soc Gen, like ING, it's going to be about a 60% project finance, 20% what we call concessional funding. We've seen a lot of international institutions like my old shop, the World Bank, where they provide guarantees to a project finance loan, or actually subsidize, quote unquote, up to 25% of the cost of electrolyzers, which leaves on a relatively conservative basis just around 20% of needed for equity. So on projects which on phase one will cost around $60 to $70 million in Iceland, and around 100 between 95 and $110 million in Paraguay, we see that it's quite a compelling story, because the moment you have phase one, you know where phase two is going to go, and the valuation for phase two is going to be reflecting. So the phase two valuation is going to be reflected in the share price. And sorry, I'm going to go and see a couple of the questions, because I've answered about. And there's one question from Zivko on, are there any restrictions to exporting ammonia out of Paraguay if it makes economical sense in the future? So I will give that one to James.
Thank you, Olivier. Well, that gives me the opportunity to mention that Paraguay is a founding member of the Mercosur trading bloc, which was signed in 1991. It came into effect in 1995. So Paraguay today has a free trade area with the other three countries, and a free trade agreement with Chile, for example. So we have preferential and zero tariff access to the markets. So we don't see any inconvenience there, as long as, of course, all the norms are complied with. And I also wanted to mention that we've had very good meetings with the Vice Ministry of Energy, which is the maximum authority of energy policy in Paraguay. And just in the month of June, they have published the roadmap for green hydrogen in Paraguay, so for domestic use. And it was good to see that Atome and the Atome's roadmap is completely aligned to what Paraguay is committing itself to do, not only as national policy, but also with international commitments, and just recently in COP26. So there's a lot of enthusiasm that Atome can be a great partner to really implement what the government is wanting to do.
Thank you, James. And there's one question from Mark B, which is on our 10th December RNS. We stated a pre-money valuation of about £20 million. What is the basis for that valuation? So as you may know, our brokers were SP Angel and FinCap. And both of the analysts, Sam and Mark, actually came up with their own analysis, which came up with a roughly similar result, where what they did is taking the risk NPV valuation of the project and discount that number to around 15% of the NPV. The intention is what we will expect to see happen, like in most of these infrastructure projects, is you would get to a de-risking of that 15% by the time you reach FID. And then as you reach first hydrogen, first production, you move into a complete different infra valuation, which is a multiple of EBITDA. So if I have to give you an example for, again, Hydrogène de France, because it is the closest comparable we have in the region, they have been valued at 16 times EBITDA. We've been a bit more conservative. We've looked at our peers, our comparables, and we're looking at around 10 times EBITDA. And it seems to us, it's our target. This is where we think we will be. But again, we're only talking about these two projects. We think that these two projects are a platform for us to do a lot more, and we will grow as we prove on the ground that we can deliver. And finally, I see a question from Zivko, which is, at one point do we expect to become profitable? Well, actually, it can actually come quite fast. We have quite conservatively looked at a business model where we would be looking at selling ammonia at around $500 per ton. Today's ammonia market is over $1,000 a ton. We were looking at around $5 a kilo of hydrogen. We can produce it for much less than that. So we think that per phase you would see quite an acceleration of how profitable we'll get, and especially since we haven't including any of the carbon income which would be derived from the project. So for us, it is let's say icing on top, but we will leverage every single lever so that we will absolutely be profitable by the time before the end of the decade. And again, this is just on these two projects, and considering we will be working all around the value chain of hydrogen and helping import hydrogen trucks, helping switch the engines of these boats and tugboats to ammonia, as you are competing with very expensive imports of energy. And as we know here, the oil and gas sector is being stripped from access to capital. So it is increasingly likely that the cost of both gas and oil are only going into one direction. As capital as capitals disappear, the access to reserves will become more and more restrained, meaning that there will be more emphasis on green energies like ours. And our goal is we want to be first producing at the lowest cost possible so that we can make the most margin. And it's all about, it's all going to be a very marginal a business where the marginal cost of a molecule will make you the winner. And I think I have run out of questions.
Olivia, that's kind. I was just going to jump in there. Obviously, if there are any more questions that come in or any questions that we haven't had an opportunity to address, obviously we'll make those available and publish responses where that is appropriate to do so. Olivier, I know that investor feedback will be particularly relevant and important to you and the rest of the team. And I wonder, before I redirect investors to provide you with their thoughts and expectations, whether I could just hand back just for a few closing comments.
So I think first of all, we want to thank you. We want to thank you for being here. It is clearly it is a new revolution, and the way we see it, this is the future of energy and commodity. And we have to remember that the flexibility that you get from hydrogen and ammonia, it makes a real difference. And this is why our business, we believe, because we will be on the lowest end of the cost curve, we will be able to deliver fast. We will be the best place to take advantage of that economy, that growth within this decade. So, welcome to the adventure, and expect a lot of news flow in 2022 as we deliver everything we say that we will deliver.
Olivier, James, Mary Rose, thank you once again for updating investors this afternoon. Can I please ask investors not to close this session, as we'll now automatically redirect you for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of President Energy and Atome, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, and wish you all a very good afternoon.